Welcome, dear listener. Tonight, allow your mind to wander far beyond the edges of your world. Let the noise of the day drift away like mist over a still lake. You are safe now, and there is only this story, a tale whispered across time, wrapped in the silence of forgotten winds. Our story begins in a realm covered in shadow, but not the cruel kind that strikes with fear. No, this shadow is gentle and quiet, like an old book tucked away on a shelf, waiting to be opened. In this world, long after the age of kings and heroes had ended, a lone wizard lived in a tower carved into the spine of the world. His name was Calrin, not a name of legend, not a name sung by bards, but one spoken softly by those who remembered the time before the sky turned gray. Calrin was old not in years alone, but in memories. His beard was silver and soft like the first snowfall. His robes, deep green and layered in dust, brushed gently across the stone floors wherever he walked. He moved like someone who had seen too much and spoken too little. His tower stood alone on a cliff overlooking a dead forest. The trees were tall and pale as though carved from candle wax, their limbs stretching upward as if trying to remember the sun. The sky above was not black nor blue, but a deep ash color, smooth and endless. It had not changed in over a century. Calrin spent his days in silence, not because he enjoyed it, but because silence was safer. In the early years, he had tried to speak with spirits, to reach out through magic to understand what had gone wrong. Why the stars no longer sang, why rivers stopped dancing, why the animals disappeared into the earth as if they had simply chosen to sleep. But the voices that answered him were not the ones he had hoped to hear. They were hollow and slow, speaking truths wrapped in riddles that made his head ache and his dreams burn. And so, he stopped asking. Instead, he wrote. He dipped his quill into violet ink and filled page after page with spells no one would cast and stories no one would read. He lit candles that never melted and drank tea that never cooled, watching each night as the same colorless sky refused to change. Still, the tower was peaceful in its own way. Its stones were warm in the morning, and the wind that passed through the open archways brought the scent of old wood and distant storms. Ravens came often, perching on the windowsills, their black feathers shining like obsidian. Calrin fed them bits of dried fruit and old bread, and in return, they left behind tiny bones and golden threads. Gifts from places he would never go. But even peace can begin to feel heavy. And on one particular evening, as Calrin sat alone with his thoughts, something strange happened. A knock echoed through the chamber soft, slow, and deliberate. Not the wind, not a raven, a knock as clear as a bell on winter glass. Calvin stood, slower than he used to, and made his way to the door at the base of the tower. He hadn't opened it in decades. His fingers trembled as they brushed the old wood. The knock came again, not louder, not urgent, but certain, as if the visitor knew he would answer. When the door creaked open, there was no one standing there, only the cold air and the smell of smoke. But on the step, resting neatly in the center of a silver circle of dust, lay a scroll. It was bound in crimson thread, tied in a perfect knot, and sealed with wax, bearing a symbol Calvin hadn't seen since he was a young man. A flame curled into the shape of an eye. He bent down slowly, careful not to break the circle, and picked up the scroll. The moment his hand touched it, a quiet warmth spread through his fingers and into his chest. Not fire, not danger. Something older, a memory. Something had awoken. And in that moment, Calvin knew the silence was ending. The tower would not stay quiet much longer. Whatever had slept beneath the roots of the world had begun to stir. And the scroll in his hand, so small and silent, held the first whisper of everything to come. The scroll was not heavy, but in Calvin's hand, it felt as if he were holding a living thing, a creature that breathed slowly and waited patiently to be heard. The crimson thread that bound it had not frayed, not even with time. The wax seal, a coiled flame shaped like an eye, gleamed with a faint shimmer as though it had been sealed just moments before. He held it for a while without opening it. Instead, he stood quietly at the door of his tower, gazing out at the pale forest that slumbered beneath the ashen sky. Nothing moved. No wind stirred the branches. The world, as always, waited in stillness. Yet in his heart, a ripple had begun. Not fear, not dread, stirring. The same feeling one gets when standing on the edge of a long-forgotten trail, wondering if their feet might remember how to walk it. Calvin stepped back inside, closing the door behind him with care, and carried the scroll up the spiral stairs of his tower. The stones beneath his feet were smooth from centuries of walking. Each step echoed gently, like a memory returning to the surface. He reached his study, a round chamber filled with shelves that curled around the walls like the rings of an ancient tree. Books filled every space. Some were bound in leather, some in bark, and some in material that no longer existed in the world outside. On his desk rested an old oil lamp, flickering quietly beside an untouched teacup. The room smelled of dust and time, of parchment and something older. The air felt expectant. He sat slowly, his joints stiff but familiar with emotion. With a deep breath, He untied the crimson thread. It fell away in one piece, curling like a sleeping snake across the table. Then, with steady hands, he broke the seal. The scroll unrolled itself, as if glad to breathe again. There were no words at first, only symbols, circles within circles, etched in ink that shimmered between gold and blue. Kalirin leaned closer. These were not sigils he had seen before, not in any of the high tomes, not even in the forbidden volumes buried beneath the floor stones of the ruined citadels. This script felt ancient in a different way, not older than language, but perhaps older than time. A language spoken by silence itself. Then, slowly, the scroll began to change. The symbols reshaped themselves, folding like petals into lines of written text, not in a foreign tongue, but in his own hand, as if he had written them long ago and forgotten. He read aloud, his voice deep and calm, the way a mountain might speak if it ever chose to speak at all. To the last bearer of the hollow flame, keeper of the unbroken silence, your path begins again. The fire sleeps still beneath the roots, but it waits for no more. You must go to the mirror lake where the sky first fell and listen. There you will hear the name that was taken. There you will find the spark. Kalrin stopped reading. His breath was steady, but inside him, something had cracked open. A memory that had not belonged to him a moment before now sat quietly in his mind, waiting. The Mirror Lake. He had not heard that name since he was a boy, wandering the edge of maps in search of stories. A place where the sky was said to have shattered during the first war of the stars. A place long lost, buried beneath soil and myth. No one had spoken of it in an age. But now, the scroll called him there, not as a question, but as a truth. He rolled the parchment carefully. The words, now still and quiet, and placed it in a carved wooden tube he hadn't touched in decades. His hand lingered on the desk, fingers brushing the smooth surface. He knew what this meant. The piece he had wrapped around himself like a cloak had begun to unravel. The world was calling him again, and though his body was old, his magic quiet, and his heart worn thin, he would answer, because he remembered now what he had once promised. In the time before silence, when the towers still hummed with life and the skies were blue, Kalrin had stood at a sacred fire and sworn an oath. He would be the last to guard the hollow flame. He would wait until it called, and it had called. He rose and began gathering what little he would take. A satchel lined with wards, a polished wooden staff bound in copper, a small stone that pulsed with the heartbeat of the earth, and one book, his own, blank pages waiting to be filled. As night came, if it could be called that, in a world without sun. Calren stood at the threshold of his tower once more. The ravens watched him from the ledges, their eyes catching what little light still drifted through the clouds. One of them called softly, as if to ask where he was going. Calren smiled. A small thing, quiet and worn, but real. "I'm going to remember," he said. Then he stepped down the path that led away from the tower, his staff tapping softly against the stone. The forest before him whispered with the sound of dry leaves and secrets. The journey had begun, and somewhere, far below the surface of the world, the hollow flame flickered once more. The path beyond Calron's tower had no name nor direction. There were no signs, no stones to mark the way, no worn grooves from travelers' feet. It was a path made of knowing, the kind that lives deep inside the bones, waiting for the right silence to awaken it. Calron's steps were slow and steady, but there was no hesitation in them. Though he had not walked these lands in 100 years or more, his feet moved with the grace of memory. Not a memory of thought, but of feeling, like the gentle rhythm of breathing or the quiet ache of an old scar. The pale forest rose around him as he walked, its trees tall and ghost-like. Their trunks were smooth and colorless, like pillars of stone carved from moonlight. No leaves hung from the branches, no birds sang in the air. The only sound was the soft whisper of Calron's robes brushing against brittle grass, and the steady tap of his staff upon the earth. The forest had once had a name, back when names still held power. Some called it the Morning Wood, others the Ghost-Root Vale. But Calren remembered its true name, whispered only in the tongues of dream sorcerers and root keepers. It was called the Forest Beneath Memory, a place not entirely in the world, nor entirely out of it. A forest that existed in the space between thoughts, between heartbeats. It was said that those who entered without purpose would forget why they had come, and those who entered with lies would never find their way out. But Calren had come with truth in his hands and silence in his soul. He walked with the calm presence of a man who had already let go of what could not be carried. And so the forest let him pass. As he moved deeper into its stillness, the light around him began to shift. Not brighter, not darker, only different. The air grew heavy with the scent of old things, cedar and parchment, wet stone and wild lavender. Strange mushrooms glowed at the bases of trees, pulsing faintly with a soft green light. Small creatures peeked out from behind bark and vanished before they could be seen. Shadows curled and uncurled like sleeping animals, but none dared approach the wizard's path. Calren stopped now and then to press his hand against the trees, whispering small words, not spells, but acknowledgments. Thank you. I see you. I remember. The trees responded not with sound, but with warmth, a low vibration, like the hum of a distant drum echoing beneath the soil. He came to a clearing at the heart of the forest, where the trees bent back to reveal a sky that had not been touched in centuries. Here, the clouds hung lower, and the air shimmered with quiet tension. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient stone, tall, black, and split down the center. It was the marker. Carved into its face was the same symbol from the scroll, a coiled flame shaped like an eye. Calvin stood before it, placing one hand upon the cold surface. The moment he touched it, a sound rose from the earth, low, distant, and steady. Not a voice, not a word, but a tone. A hum older than speech, as though the land itself were remembering a song it had once sung. The ground beneath his feet trembled slightly, and the forest seemed to lean closer. Then the crack in the stone widened, slowly, with a groaning sigh. From within the opening, a faint blue light began to spill out, soft and steady like water in moonlight. Calvin did not step back. He simply waited, breathing calmly, his hand still resting on the stone. From the light came a figure, not a person, not a creature, but a presence. It had no form in the usual sense, only an outline like smoke made of stars. It hovered just above the ground, its shape shifting gently as if it were listening for something. Calvin spoke first, his voice quiet but sure. I am the last keeper of the hollow flame. I have come to remember. The figure did not answer in words. Instead, it drifted toward him, and as it did, the air grew warmer, not with heat, but with memory. Images poured into Calron's mind, not as visions, but as feelings. A city made of glass and salt, a tower that reached into the sea, a flame buried beneath the roots of the world, pulsing like a heart, and a name not yet spoken, but waiting. Then, as quickly as it had come, the figure retreated into the stone. The light dimmed, the crack closed. The marker returned to stillness, but something had changed. Calvin looked down and saw that the ground around him had shifted. What was once wild grass and tangled root had become smooth stone, shaped into a narrow path that wound away from the clearing and down into the deeper forest. The path glowed faintly with the same blue light, marking the way ahead. The forest had given him its blessing. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of thanks, and turned to follow the path. His staff tapped quietly, steady and sure. No fear pressed against him. No urgency pulled at his mind. He simply walked deeper into the unknown with the calm purpose of a man who had waited a lifetime for this moment. The hollow flame was waking, and somewhere beyond trees and stone, the forgotten name was waiting to be heard. The path led downward, always downward, deeper than Calrin had ever walked in his long years. It wound like a ribbon of starlight through the forest, past places where no trees grew, and the earth seemed made of black crystal. The light beneath his feet, gentle and pulsing, did not fade as he continued. It hummed with quiet patience, guiding him like a voice that did not need to speak. Calron's mind, long quieted by age, had begun to stir with dreams. Not the wild, tangled dreams of youth, nor the sharp visions granted by sorcery, but dreams of understanding. Dreams where he stood beneath vast skies and heard music in the movement of clouds. Dreams where he was not alone. He did not rush. Every step was a ceremony. Every breath an offering. He felt the world around him listening, and so he walked with care. Even the birds, though long vanished, seemed to watch from unseen branches. The land remembered him, just as he remembered it. At last, the path came to its end. Before him stretched a valley made of silence. There were no trees here, no wind, only stillness, vast and deep, like a breath held for centuries. At the heart of the valley lay a lake, perfectly round and still as polished glass. Its surface was darker than night, but reflected everything. The clouds above, the pale cliffs, the old stones, and Calrin himself, all mirrored with perfect clarity, though the water never rippled. This was the Mirror Lake. It had been spoken of in ancient songs, in runes carved beneath cathedrals, now turned to dust. A place where the sky had once shattered during the first war of the stars, where a hole had opened in the world and let truth bleed through. Calrin stepped to the edge, his staff planted gently in the earth. He knelt slowly, knees touching the moss-soft shore. The reflection of his face in the lake was older than he expected. Not wrinkled. No, those lines he had grown used to, but tired. Not with sorrow, but with time. He reached into his satchel and pulled out the scroll. The crimson thread had vanished. The parchment, once filled with symbols and words, was now blank again. Whatever had called him here had said all it needed to say. Calrin placed the scroll on the water, and it did not sink. It floated as light as air and began to glow. He whispered, not to the lake, but to the space within himself that had never forgotten. I am ready. The water shifted. A single ripple spread outward from the scroll, and then another. The lake began to stir. Light bloomed from below. Not golden, not silver, but the soft hue of flame. A living flame, not burning, not consuming, only warm. It rose slowly, lifting the scroll until it disappeared into brightness. Then came the sound, It was not loud. It was not sharp. It was the sound of a name being spoken, not aloud, but within the soul. A name that had no letters, no beginning or end. A name that had been taken from the world long ago, hidden so deeply that only the hollow flame remembered it. And as Calvin heard it, he understood. The name was not a word, but a truth. It was the name of the world before it broke, the name of magic before it was used, the name of love before it was lost. He wept then, not with sorrow, but with release, the kind of tears that fall when something forgotten is returned, when the weight is lifted, when the silence is no longer empty. The flame rose higher, surrounding him, but there was no fear, no heat, only stillness, warm and full. He felt his body grow lighter, his thoughts, once slow and weary, now moved like wind through trees. The tower, the scroll, the years of silence, all faded, not gone, but no longer heavy. He was not disappearing, he was becoming, and the hollow flame, now awake, wrapped him in its light, and whispered once more, not with words, not with fire, but with peace. When morning came, if such a thing still held meaning in a sunless world, the lake was still again. No flame glowed, only still water and the softest ripple reaching the farthest edge. And those who came to the valley in years to come, pilgrims, wanderers, dreamers, would say they felt something in that place, a hush that settled the heart, a warmth without source, a sense that something good had been remembered here. They never saw the wizard, but the ravens knew. They watched from the cliffs, their black feathers shining, waiting in silence, because they had seen what rose from the lake, and they knew the hollow flame would never sleep again, and neither would the name